Good evening and welcome to the Ferguson Library. My name is Alice Knapp. I'm the CEO here, and when I start talking, that is a great sign to sign phones. You are in for an exciting night. This is our 5th Kaplan lecture, and it's been underwritten by WRKK. Even when I don't say the full words, I get it wrong. WRKK generously, and we're very excited about it because it's part of our civic role. Hold these types of lectures, as there is also a part of our civic role, have books where you can read freely in what you choose. I say this because for the last 4 years, librarians have been under challenge across the nation. And there's a great documentary being shown Monday evening, November 17th, at the Avon Theater called The Librarians. It documents what the librarians have been going through. And we love to say that it doesn't happen here, but it does. And because of that, our wonderful legislature passed freedom to read bills this past June. So, please check out our challenge books. Please feel free to talk about this issue with me anytime you would like. It is a very important one. And meanwhile, you're going to have a very dynamic lecture tonight. I am so pleased that it's called the Kaplan Lecture, in honor of Gabe Kaplan, and he was a wonderful citizen of the city of Stamford. With this, I would like
to thank you, Alice. Good. I just wanted to say thanks on behalf of Howard Kaplan's. My mom, who unfortunately is not here. Thank you, Sean Duffy and the government shutdown. My sisters and I and our children. First of all, I want to thank the First has continued to host this community event named after my father. I want to thank Alice for reminding us what an important community resource. I want to thank Wofsy, Rosen, Kweskin, and Kuryansky. I know how to say the name. I was like, I don't know, like taught at the dinner table. Wofsy Rosen was my dad's work family, and I mean that in the finest sense of that term. And I particularly want to thank my dad's partners, David Cohn and Dan Young and Steve Frederick, who are here tonight, who have really supported this lecture series, made sure it was a success, and also hosted a little bit of a mini Kaplan every year. Finally, I want to thank Attorney General Tong for agreeing to be here tonight. I know that he'll be speaking tonight about state sovereignty. I don't know what he's going to say on that topic, but I know what he has been doing for the last 9 or 10 months. That has been suing the United States to protect all the residents of the state of Connecticut from federal overreach. And as a attorney who spent my entire career in the service of the federal government, I'd like to say thank you. On behalf of my dad, who, as many of you know, was a true believer in American values and rule of law, proud American patriot, on his behalf also, I'd like to say thank you. So now to move to the main event, I'm pleased to introduce Dad's former partner, Stephen Frederick.
Thanks, Jen. Wofsy, Rosen, Kweskin, and LLP. Nobody got the LLP part. As a current and as someone who Howard believes served as reps in Stanford, founding member ethics. That it's many of us, our cap. That's really back about society, better place. That's what best is. That's
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, WAFC LLP. Try to get all that. I apologize for where today. I'm a bit old. Ligament. I have to sit down at some. But thank you so much for having me here tonight. Let me first thank, where's Alice? Thank you, Alice. Thank you to the staff. Thank you to the whole library here in Stamford for making sure that people have access. Give them a round of applause. As Alice may know, of the now 40 cases I've brought January 20th, one of them is to secure library funding that was wrongfully cut by them. So even the libraries are. So I want to thank the Ferguson. Thank you to Kaplan family, Jennifer's, and your entire family for supporting this lecture series. Thank you for your debt. I was saying to the mayor just got reelected. Yes. And I was saying to the mayor, when I came back home to Connecticut, Stamford had, and I hope in some measure, vibrant people involved in the theater, and they went involved in profits. That's so important to healthy, vibrant, strong community. Howard Kaplan exemplified. Reading his biography, I didn't know. It reminds me, first of all, I've got a lot to do to catch up to some in all the board representatives, establishing the board of ethics, serving and. But it reminds me how relative, how many more. So, yes, yeah. Howard is exampled by being more like. We do that. Let me just say also that I feel some trepidation being here tonight at home, for letting me at home and not in far-flung place, far from here. I traverse all over the place. It's great when I get to be home. But I have some trepidation because many of you were there when I first began my service in public service. Some of you were there when I was trying to break in, and some people weren't having it. But it's hard for the people that were there. It's going to be hard for you to hear. I'm about to begin my 20th year in election. So some of you are like, what's this kid doing here tonight, right? Where's he been, by the way? How come he hasn't knocked on my door recently? So I'm here to talk about our work, about this moment, and the important role of the state. And if it's okay with you, is there a video going right here, right now? There's not, is there? There is, okay. Am I allowed to move around? Okay, can I do this? Can I do this? All right, I'm gonna do my Donahue thing. People in this room might remember who Donahue was. When I do this in front of college students, if I say Donahue and Oprah, they're like, what? So because this is sponsored by a law firm and is in honor of a great lawyer, we're going to go to law school for 60 seconds. Okay, we're gonna dig into it a little bit. So I'm going to ask a question. Of all the people in the room, if the lawyers get it wrong, you risk disbarment. Why? So let me back up. This is a structural question. Okay, so I'm asking you from a structural perspective. Think about how the federal government, state government, how we are organized. Okay, how we sit vis-a-vis one another. Why does Connecticut have an attorney general? Don't make me call on people, Steve Frederick. Why does Connecticut have an attorney general? This is giving the lawyers PTSD. Yes, that's a good reason. To do justice, yes, I'm going to talk about that. Yeah, yes. Okay, you're getting warmer. Somebody went to law school. This is the sovereign state of Connecticut. Sometimes people overlook that fact and forget that fact. My Republican colleagues coined the phrase states' rights. My Democratic colleagues and I tried progressive federalism. It doesn't have quite the same ring. We are sovereign, the people of this state. What does that mean? That means that we get to live largely the way we want to live. We get to decide for ourselves. That's why we have a state constitution. The state constitution says that we shall have an attorney general. I was the last constitutional officer created in 18. And the Constitution says that we shall elect the attorney general, and I'm the state's chief legal officer and lawyer. Other states do it differently. New Jersey does not have an attorney general in their constitution. Neither does Oregon. Okay, the attorney general of New Jersey is appointed by the governor. He works for the governor. There's some independence, but it's a totally different set. And so in Connecticut, in the sovereign state of Connecticut, we decided we wanted a governor, a legislature, 2 houses, attorney general, treasurer, comptroller, secretary. So we are sovereign, and it means that we get to pass laws and largely structure our legal system in our society the way that we want to. This is why tonight, New York State Police can't cross over into Greenwich or Stamford and tell us what to do, or Rhode Island or Massachusetts, for that matter. We are joined together by our consent in a federation with 49 other states. That federation is called, Jennifer cannot answer. That federation is called the United States of America, okay? And we delegated limited powers to the federal government. Not everything, some stuff. Things that we thought it would be better handled by a federation. If you're a Star Trek fan, maybe this. Okay? But the federation handles foreign affairs. Why? Because it'd be ridiculous for Ned Lamont to negotiate a treaty with the Canadians for tariffs. That would be ridiculous. Immigration. We're going to talk about immigration, and I'm going to get a question. Okay, we delegated broad authority to the federal government over immigration. Why? Because it makes a lot of sense that tonight we can't send customs officials from Connecticut, JFK, to check in the people from Connecticut. That's totally inefficient. National security, all these sorts of things that make sense to delegate to the federation, we have done. but they're limited. You look at my social media feed, I get a lot of armchair, mostly people in the basement, lecturing me about the law and about the Supremacy Clause. And in their view, the Supremacy Clause stands for the proposition that I have to do exactly as Donald Trump says. Wrong. That has never been what the Supremacy stands for. The Supremacy Clause says, yes, federal law can preempt state law if we have delegated authority and the federal government has preempted the field in some way or another. But it doesn't stand for the proposition that Donald Trump's in charge and can tell Connecticut what to do under all circumstances. No, because Donald Trump's power, the federal government's power, is not a top-down power. It emanates from us. That's why it's so important in this moment to refocus the mind on sovereignty and our prerogative. We have the prerogative, not the federal government. The states have the prerogative. We call the shots. We delegated limited powers, and everything else we reserve for ourselves. What amendment is that? 10. How much do you charge per hour? So the 10th Amendment says that we reserve all the other powers. And that's why, for example, there are police officers outside in Stamford enforcing Connecticut state law and criminal law, because largely criminal law is a function of the states, not of the federal government. So this is an expression of our sovereignty. Let me give an example of a recent expression of our sovereignty before I get to, I know what you all. Purdue Pharma. When I came back home from Chicago, from law school, I bought a house on Long Ridge. The Sacklers were a really big deal. Okay? And they were a really big deal across the country. And there was a nonprofit fundraiser, gala. You can be sure there was a Sackler there, and they were given a lot of money. And we were grateful for that. But we learned over time that the family, in particular Richard and the people in charge, willfully lied to us about the addictive properties of. And Attorney General Blumenthal, remember him, went after them and secured a $650 million settlement, which is a number that seems quaint. 2007. The settlement said, you can't lie to us anymore about OxyContin. You have to tell the truth, that it's addictive, that people can lose their lives over it. And instead of following the commitments they made in that settlement, they doubled down and poured gasoline on the fire, and made it a heck of a lot worse. And so by 2018, George Jepson sued Purdue Pharma Sacklers, and then I became Attorney General shortly there. And so people asked me as soon as I became Attorney General, and I knew Jonathan Sackler, he has since passed, but I knew a number of members of the family. And they said to me, well, Mr. Attorney General, what does it mean to you that Purdue Pharma is a Connecticut company? In fact, it's a Stanford-based company. And I think they expected me to make some Homer statement that I would stick up for the company, that a lot of good people work there, and sort of thing. And I said, I think it means that I have a special obligation to be a great and to hold them accountable, that it's on me. And so we did. So fast forward, there's a lawsuit. We sued them. They wanted to settle at $3 billion. I led the group that said no. Then they wanted to settle at $4.37 billion. That's when, people started to tighten up, and it was white knuckle time. And I said, William, that's a lot of money. We can't, give up this deal. And I said, it's not just about the money, it's about justice, it's about the thousands of people that will die in Connecticut this year and the millions that we will lose and have lost to the scourge of addiction. And so I led a small group of 8 states in the District of Columbia that continued to oppose the $4.37 billion deal. That was when Judge Chapman, who is a bankruptcy judge in the Southern District of New York, she was assigned by Judge Drain, who was the sitting presiding judge over the Purdue Pharma bankruptcy. He said to her, get these AGs to agree to the $4.375 billion settlement. So we're in bankruptcy court because Purdue declared bankruptcy. She's given the authority to try to basically bully us into accepting this. This is during COVID. And so she's chasing me for a Zoom meeting, and I'm trying to avoid it. And finally, I booked this meeting with Judge Chapman. And so we get on the Zoom, and she is a distinguished-looking, long-time federal judge. Intimidating, even on the other side of a Zoom. And she knows it. Right? So she's holding the space. And she starts out with a bunch of like name game, because I worked in New York City too, and you work for this person, and that person worked for me, and we're buds, and we're in this club together. And so she's trying to butter me up, and she's trying to move me along. For about 10 minutes, she's trying, and she's starting to get frustrated. Starting to see that, like, I'm not going for it. Whatever arguments she's making, I'm not buying. So finally she says, look, William, can I call you William? And I said, yes, Your Honor. She says, you're just like any other big creditor. JP Morgan Chase, Goldman, doesn't matter. I have been in the biggest bankruptcies in American history. Okay, I was in Lehman. I've seen biggest creditors on earth. And at some point, creditors just have to cut a deal and get the best deal they can get and move on. Okay? And I said, Your Honor, I hear you. And I greatly respect you and your experience. And I haven't been in the biggest bankruptcies in American history. And I have represented some of them, but not many of these big creditors that you're talking about. But there's just one problem. And she said, what's that? I said, I'm not a creditor. And she said, what do you mean? Yes, you are. You want money. No, I want justice, and I'm not a creditor. I'm a sovereign. And you don't have the authority as on Article 3 bankruptcy, okay, to make a state sovereign give up its rights to pursue the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma. She looked at me, and the look on her face was, oh, shit. So that's what I do. That's an example, a real life example of the exercise of our sovereignty. That the state of Connecticut, when I walk into a courtroom, or any lawyer in my office walks into a courtroom, I have to remind them, I'm not William Tong, and you're not such and such Assistant Attorney General. You're the state of Connecticut. And you're exercising our sovereign authority in whatever role you're in whatever case you're in. And so this entire battle with the president and the Trump administration is largely distilled down to sovereignty. Now, it's also about the millions of people that he is hurting, crushing right now. I have spent the last 2 weeks learning more about the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program than I would have to learn. And I spent all weekend, minute by minute, with my team of lawyers and lawyers from New York, and California, all across the country, trying to make EBT cards, SNAP cards, food stamp cards were fully funded. so that children in Connecticut who need that, more than 100,000 children, would eat. But it boils down to sovereignty. And let me give you an example, and I'll use immigration. So essentially what the president wants us to do is do his bidding on immigration, right? And the argument he is trying to make is that I'm in charge, you work for me, and if I need state police or local police or judicial marshals to detain somebody or go after somebody, they have to do that. And if you don't do that, I'm going to withhold funding for DOT. That's one case. Or FEMA. That's another. Problem is he's wrong. Why is he wrong? He's wrong because the sovereign state of Connecticut signed up for that. Yes, we delegated limited powers over immigration to the federal government. That means that's your job, not ours. It's a very simple proposition, principle known as federalism. Okay? We delegated broad power and authority, and so it's going to disappoint some people because you may ask this during the Q&A. What can we do and about their tactics? And the answer, the honest answer is we have limited option. Why? Because we gave them that power. The states gave them that authority. Because in a rational world, it makes sense to do that. When somebody doesn't abuse that power, it makes sense the federal government should handle that. So we have a law here in Connecticut called the Trust Act, right? Some people are familiar with the Trust Act. The Trust Act, they try to make out to be this big, controversial nullification of federal law. It's none of that. We, the state of Connecticut, are fully compliant with federal law. Nobody's nullifying anything. I am not failing to follow federal law. Okay? I'm observing the proper relationship between state government and the federal government and the sovereign state of Connecticut and the federal government to which we have power. The federal government doesn't have the authority to commandeer state and local resources to do their job for them. That's their job, not our job. They have no right to condition grants on law enforcement, for transportation, for emergency management, on compliance with requirements that we have no obligation to meet. So that's why the battle with the president over immigration is largely a matter of sovereignty, question of sovereignty. It's a violation of our sovereignty to make us do things we don't have to do and we never said we would do. It's also a violation of sovereignty to intrude into areas that are not of federal concern, like what books we have in this library, okay? Or how we educate our children, and yes, what pronouns people choose to use in Connecticut. Now, to be fair, we can have that discussion amongst ourselves, and we do, and it gets a little chippy sometimes, but that's our decision, not theirs. So it is a violation of our sovereignty to not give us money from the Department of Education, for example, because we won't do exactly as they say, and we dare to say the words diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Okay? By the way, I want to make an observation. The vice president went to law school down the street from here, or up the street. I wish we could take it back. Yale Law School receives tens of thousands of applications every year, including one from Howard Kaplan, okay? They take 175 to 180 students, one of the smallest classes anywhere, okay, of any elite law school. Everybody who applies and is in the game, there are tens of thousands of those applicants who have near perfect or perfect LSAT scores and have 4.0s from wherever they went to school, wherever they went to college. All of them are academically qualified. There's no question. So did the vice president get in because of his eminent brilliance? Or did the vice president get in because he comes from rural Ohio, Middletown, Ohio, and Yale decided that they wanted his voice in the classroom among 175 other students? That's called diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And then, of course, there are so many battles over federal funding. I don't have to list them all. We've talked about libraries, education, SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This is also about sovereignty. Why? Because we made a deal. The states made a deal amongst themselves. We're going to get together in this federation, and the terms and conditions of that federation are set forth in a document. Document is United States Constitution, right? That's what it is. It's the contract. It's the covenant. It's the terms and conditions of how Connecticut is going to live with New York, and New York's going to live with Texas and Alabama, and so on. And when you violate the Constitution, you violate our sovereignty, because we gave up rights to be in this union, but only according to the terms and conditions. And one of the very most important things that is said early on in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, is Congress shall have the power, right, to basically appropriate money, spend money. And Congress has the power to legislate, subject to some participation. And so when Congress has spoken, that's it. You don't have the power as the executive to countermand the will of Congress. And you don't have the power to make up powers that Congress didn't give you, like tariffs. Okay? The president alleges that he can use the International Economic Emergency Act, IEPA. I had no idea what IEPA was, but that you can use IEPA to levy tariffs. Here's the problem. Nothing in IEPA talks about tariffs. There's no language in there about tariffs, number one. And number two is it talks about an emergency. Okay, you could argue that there's a trade emergency with some countries, but not every country. There's no trade emergency with Canada. So that's why it is so utterly unlawful for the president to levy his tariffs, which is why we won district court. That case, by the way, on tariffs is our case. So we won at the district court level. We won at the Court of Appeals, the specialized Court of Appeals called the Federal Circuit. And that's why the Supreme Court was like, what? You don't have that power. They were so skeptical of the other, which was good to see. Good to see the Supreme Court doing its job. And so all of this is a matter of our sovereignty and protecting our sovereignty. I'm going to get to questions. But I do want to acknowledge how hard this has been. And I outset, brutal for so many families that have been impacted, people that depend on SNAP, immigrants, power this great city, and our friends, our neighbors, and it's been really very hard and discouraging. It's easy at times to lose hope, get discouraged. And people have said to me, I don't recognize our country. I don't know who we are anymore. And so I try to remind people, I know exactly who. We are, this state, one of the original 13. We stood up to the original tyrant, told them to buzz off, and we beat them. And then in 1860, thought that slavery was intolerable. and the union threatened to splinter apart over the issue, we sent 50,000 soldiers to hold the union together then. And then in the 1930s and 1940s, when my grandparents were running for their lives. That's why I'm here. I am the grandson of refugees. They ran for their lives, like so many of your forebears ran for their lives in Europe and all over the world. And we sent 300,000 people to stand up to at least 3 tyrants. We beat them. So if you're discouraged, don't be. If you're worried about whether we can do this, can. We have done it before. We have prevailed before. And if Donald Trump thinks he can send American soldiers to Connecticut against American citizens on American soil, he will have to come through me and all of us, and we are not afraid of him. So people ask me, and I think this was one of the questions that folks had already submitted, what gives you hope? What gives me hope is this Chinese kid is standing. What gives me hope is that my parents came here with nothing. Dad had 7 cents in his pocket when he showed up in Hartford, Connecticut. And he met my mom in a Chinese restaurant called the Hong Kong Kitchen in Bloomfield. No shit, the Hong Kong Kitchen. And they opened a place, and they're very lucky that they were successful in their small Chinese restaurant. They had a son. When I was born, I was first American citizen in my immediate family by right of my birth on American soil. You heard me right. I'm not a citizen because my parents were. A citizen because the 14th Amendment says I'm. And so they worked extraordinarily hard, story goes. But in 6th grade, roughly, business started to go in the wrong direction. There was too much competition, frankly. You know, it used to be that families like the Kaplans would go out for Chinese food on a Friday night. But then it became kind of like pizza, and they got takeout on a Tuesday night. So business started to get hard for us. So my parents did the only thing that small business immigrant people can do. They called on their children. So I got up off the bench. I worked side by side with my parents, cooking, cleaning, washing dishes. Right, John Luizos? Doing everything that your immigrant parents need you to do. He lived the same thing. Dad's auto body shop. And I will tell you, I look back on that experience I'm grateful, with gratitude, because it has everything to do with who I am and how I approach my life and the work that I do. But it also sucked to have to work nights and weekends as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, while your friends were out at the movies and going to parties and going to concerts. I never saw Michael Jackson. Well, back then. And so I worked nights and weekends with my parents, and it was hard, and I still remember the chaos. I remember how hot it was. I remember how demanding it was. I remember my parents yelling at me. It wasn't in that respect. But in one generation, I went from that hot Chinese restaurant kitchen to being the 25th Attorney General of the state of Connecticut. Thank you. Yes, I know that's an applause line. But I tell you that story not because the special story. I tell you that story because it's not special. I tell you that story because my experience, my parents' experience is unremarkable. Because so many people share. So many people in this room, so many people out there. There are parents like mine out there right now who work 7 days a week, 12 to 15 hours a day. And they're fighting for every inch. And their children are just like me. They're doing their part. They're fighting for every inch. And I know we'll make it. Know it. But only if we fight for them right. Thanks, everybody. Okay.
So as everybody knows, asked to submit questions from all the questions, my questions, libraries, the exception of a few questions. The first and foremost, whether I can get partial credit for being one amendment.
Yes. As the Attorney General.
I graduated law school a long time ago. And if Alice, you mentioned, and so one of my questions is, you mentioned that option, ICE rate. My question is, any options, what are they?
Yes. So ICE broadly, we're in a number of cases that are opposing and winning federal government's efforts to condition grants and federal actions on whether we comply with ICE and bidding. So that's one high-level option. The legislature is still in session right now, I believe, and they're considering a number of provisions that will maybe strengthen the Trust Act. There's nothing wrong with the Trust Act, by the way. It's eminently lawful for the state to pass a law directing how state and local officials are going to act. And on top of that, in our courthouses, because it's state property, we've limited the number of arrests that can be made in a courthouse, and we're limiting the masking of faces, wearing of these costumes, just conceal identity, but to scare people into. We're always on the lookout for large, broad-based violations of people's civil rights. I say large, broad-based because I don't represent individuals. I represent the state and the state's interests. So I step in when large groups of people are impacted because the state is impacted. And so we'll take action if those cases present themselves. But the hard truth is ICE has an awful lot of power. And they don't have to be nice about it. And the hard truth is that we, the collective, chose this, at least for the next 3.5 years. And the American people decided that this is what they wanted in their president and their federal government. The only way it is largely going to change is if we choose another path. I know that's unsafe. It is to me too.
hopeful message you gave when you also mentioned.
That's why I do that first.
By the way, that was going to be my last question for
Yeah,
you to
yeah,
leave everybody
yeah.
uplifted. Mentioned that you weren't afraid. Or have been
Yes.
afraid. What can we?
So there are couple things. Number one is we are in the California case, we're in the Oregon case, we're in the Illinois case, and a bit of a mixed bag there. But the president has limited authority to deploy National Guards people, but active duty military against American citizens on America. It is clear he does not have the authority to order active duty military and National Guards people law enforcement work. And that's a law called posse comitatus. And what they're doing is they're getting right close to the line. Why are they doing that? On the one hand, because they want to see how far they can push it. On the other hand, they're trying to be provocative. I don't want to diminish how serious this threat is, but I also want to acknowledge it's one big show. But the show is doing tremendous damage to our country, our institutions, to the military, to the rule of law. And so we're going to continue to oppose all of these actions in court. We think we have good, strong arguments. The challenge is on these issues, the courts give a lot of deference to the president and the executive branch. That's not new, by the way. What's new is this idea of the unitary executive, which is really dangerous. That's the idea that the president basically is unbound by checks and balances on all matters of executive branch authority. The president is the final arbiter, and that's just wrong. Not how this country. We have checks and balances. Courts say what the law is, not the president. That's been true for 205 years. Let me also say, though, when I have these conversations, people want to go down the rabbit hole, right? And they want to say, well, what happens if Alabama National Guard comes in here, they do this or that? And my advice to you is don't go there, okay? Because we are not there. We have to, as hard as we can, not to get. The answer, what happens if that happens, is then we're in a very dark place, and this is a very different country. And that is a very dangerous situation if a National Guard troop from another state comes in armed and threatens people here in Connecticut or in any other state. That is a situation that we not only should not wish for, but we should not anticipate. We should be prepared, but we should not anticipate. What is going to be the answer to that? Well, I think you know the answer. The answer is we're in the streets. I'm not advocating, by the way, for mass civil disobedience in case that ends up on a YouTube or something or social media, but the people cannot abide that.
One of the things that lawyers overreach looks like success at but it seems like these either through appeals or challenges, there any way accelerated United States Supreme Court?
So, a couple things. Be careful what you wish for. Okay, for the lawyers in the room, you got to be strategic and smart about how you prosecute your cases and your litigation. Some fights are unavoidable. Fight them because they had. But the way in which you fight them, when you bring them, how you bring them is really important. Bad to lose. Right? We haven't even touched the merits of birthright citizenship. But we had an argument before the Supreme Court. I was there, and that argument was about nationwide injunctions, a technical issue. But because it felt like the court went against us on that issue, the president declared victory. That he beat us on birthright citizenship, which is like not even close to true. We have 2 injunctions barring the president's order on birthright citizenship in the First Circuit and the Ninth Circuit. We are actually winning, not him. But it's so bad when he can make it feel like he's. And that's why you got to be really careful about the fights that you pick and how you pick them. We've been largely successful at the district court level, and some of these cases will never see the Supreme Court because they know they're wrong. So I'll give you an example. There was a big education funding fight over ESSA funding, ESSA funding. ESSA funding's been flowing to the states for 30 years. And Linda McMahon, next door, okay, she arbitrarily, with the president's encouragement, said, I'm not going to pay those grants. We're not going to pay $8 billion in education funding on July 1st because we weren't being good little children and doing what they wanted on immigration and DI and all that. So we sued, and we won, and that money is flowing, and they're like not going to touch it, right? They've decided not to appeal and not to move forward because they know we're right. And so there's a lot of that going on where don't expect every case to make it to the Supreme Court because not every case will. There are cases that we have not been successful in that it's better not to go to the Supreme Court if you know what the answer is going to be, or you risk bad ruling that impacts everybody else. One of the challenges for me is the states, Tish James and I talk all the time, right? We're more or less aligned on our strategy, but there are other organizations, plaintiffs, who are more or less on our side on these things, but they don't agree on strategy. And they just want to press forward and go to the Supreme Court. And sometimes I'm like, guys, you're going to draw a rule that impacts so many other people. You may feel good and your donors may feel that you're going bonkers over this case, but it's going to make bad law. So these are the difficult strategic choices you have to make. Let me say a final thing about the Supreme Court. Not great. Okay. There are 2 justices that are gone. Okay, Alito Thomas. Gorsuch is a textualist still. Gorsuch wrote the Bostock decision, which was about LGBTQ plus rights, and that Title VII applies to members of the LGBT plus community. That was a good decision, and he read the text and stuck to the words of the statute. So maybe in the breach, Gorsuch can still be a textualist and read the words. Kavanaugh, it's kind of a wild card. The Chief Justice, we thought until the presidential immunity decision was going to be more center-right than he has proven himself to be, which leaves Amy. And I have to joke, rest Dick Cheney's soul, you're in the twilight zone when you love the Bushes and the Cheneys now. And every night we're like, come on, Amy Coney Barrett. But that's what it comes down to. Many cases, and the Chief Justice. But we need Amy.
Protecting the integrity of elections. For office.
Yes, we have sued on the elections EO, the elections executive order that has, frankly, a bunch of hate racist stuff in it about voter ID, that kind of thing. and we have an injunction on that executive order. I think the chance that they're going to send National Guard or some law enforcement to Connecticut to intimidate Connecticut voters is probably long. Why? Because they don't have the resources, right? They know what's going to happen in Connecticut. I do worry about what's going to happen in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Georgia and Texas. Things are changing in those places. Here's what I think about elections broadly. We will have a presidential, and I think it will be largely free and fair. Will there be some nonsense? But here's the challenge, which is why the president hasn't been able to achieve everything he wants to achieve. America is too big, too decentralized, too chaotic, too a little bit crazy or a lot of bit crazy to be swallowed whole. If this were a small European, African, Asian country, Latin American, something small, it'd be over already. I'd be in jail, right? I mean, but we don't live in that place. We don't live in those places. We live in one big, fat federation of 50 sovereign states, and they just don't have the muscle or the manpower to lock it down everywhere. Challenge is, will they try to lock it down in certain places, tip the scales? We're going to fight tooth and nail the courts. I will say, it's tempting to poo-poo the courts. It's been working, not completely. Why? Because, as you said, litigation is slow. Courts are slow. Process is slow. It's not a good way to run a railroad. Okay, and in the meantime, he can just do stuff. And why can people say to me, how can he get away with that? Well, he's the president. He just does it until somebody stops him. But so far, we've been able to stop him on a number of fronts. And so far, I said to the Senate President, Marty Looney, here in Connecticut, Marty's a lawyer, I said, Marty, you know you're in trouble when you're down to the lawyers and the judges. But in many ways, we are. And that system is holding.
Well, speaking about things that question comes, volunteer. Analog. See the and the question is, federal level prosecution based on eyes. Some government participate distance more effective stemming.
Let me say, first of all, this is one of the most profound attacks, not just an attack on. And let me back up before that. To watch the first firm and bend the knee did extraordinary damage. Because if you can be punished for representing somebody, and people who really need lawyers, who have been accused of doing disfavored in society, the marginalized, many people, and by the way, it doesn't have to just, it can be people like my parents who came here, didn't speak English very well. And if their landlord pushed them around where they had the restaurant and they needed to get a lawyer, if they couldn't get one because some powerful people said, no, you people, then they would have been in a really tough spot. That story, vignette, paradigm ripple across this. So what one big law firm did, and then a number of law firms, including one I used to work for, Simpson Thacher, watching them, was extraordinarily damaging, heartbreaking. One of the most meaningful things I've received in the past 9 months was a card, a hand-signed card by 30 partners at Perkins Coie in Seattle. Perkins Coie dared to stand up to the president. And we, Democratic AGs, largely joined together in an amicus brief to support Perkins. Grateful. I was grateful for their standing up and fighting for all of us. So, targeting your political opponents, this is banana republic stuff. Department of Justice to hurt your political adversaries. I believe that the case against Jim Comey and Tish James and others will be tossed, and but I don't think he cares. I think people know that they don't have a good case. They just want to terrorize people and smear them for sport.
We probably have time for questions. First took office in. How is your job different than 2019, 2020?
So it's not. I was here for 1.0. I was here for the last time we sued President Trump. I think we sued him 120 times. We're successful 80% of the time. It's only November. I'm up to 40 already. So we were locked in this struggle. But I am a firm believer that the president is not the cause. And a firm believer that people have a hard time hearing this. He reflects where the American people are right. Okay? Whether or not you voted for him is not relevant to that discussion, because they won according to have place. And I think you have to ask yourself what got us here. And so many things. But the thing I'm most worried about is the way we receive information and the way people traffic in bad information, which is why the most important consumer protection lawsuit I have right now is opioids was the big thing I did for the past 7 years. It still is the worst public health crisis. But the worst public health and public safety crisis in America and social crisis, social media. And the death of local journalism, libraries, and the lack of common facts, science. And my children, 19, 17, 14, hope we've done the best job we can, but they're flying into this hurricane. And, I routinely get messages on Facebook throughout the day, which I look at. Why do I look at them? Because I'm looking to see about me. But I look at my Facebook feed and, it'll say something like, one the other day, Bob Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, demanded that the NFL not have Bad Bunny as its halftime show performer. It's been, if you're not following, Bad Bunny is a controversial pick some quarters. I was like, oh wow, that's terrible. Bob Kraft said that? Of course, I have my spidey sense, so I took another step, like I don't have anything else to do, and I Googled, and of course it's totally untrue. But why is that on my feed like it's news? And it doesn't look like some kid ended up on their computer. It looks so real. And the AI that we are we are tripping over ourselves to embrace this technology that's dangerous without thinking about what the risks are and how we can protect humanity from this technology. We already went through this, by the way. Who here is freaked out about identity theft, right? And the purchase and sale and theft of your personal information. We all are. It didn't have to be that way. The Europeans said, hold on a second, maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe we should treat personal information like personal property. But in America, we were like, nah, screw that. We got so much money to make. This technology is amazing. Can you believe that we can sell each other's personal information and then get this, we can surveil what people want to buy on the internet and then send them push notifications on their phone so they'll buy even more. We treated our personal information like a commodity. And now we're trying to put the cat back in the bag. So that, I think, is like the biggest existential threat we face. And to bring it back to our current politics, it has roiled our public discourse and democracy. And in many ways, MAGA is a product of social media, the product of misinformation and disinformation that's trafficked so aggressively that things that aren't true can be made true. And that, I think, is the challenge of our time.
AI, it's not better, is it? Guessing that elephant that dives off the board and does. Let's talk about collaboration. Collaborate, other attorneys, and partisanship. That getting, what ways is it?
So, my first call Zoom this morning was at 11:50 National, because I'm about to become president. But there are some of my colleagues who are like, what a waste of time. Why are you trying to be the president of an organization that has Democrats, but also Ken Paxton, okay? And people that my Democratic colleagues find odious and they don't talk to Ken. They can't do it. And the answer is because we have. This is still a union, sovereign states, and it doesn't just happen. It takes work. We almost lost it once before. 700,000 people died. So in October of 2024, I was sure she was. I went around Connecticut, Democratic town committees, the run up to the election, get up there, and I basically was like, I guarantee she's going to win. It's going to be great. My friends, my colleagues, like the comptroller and the governor, they're like, hey, William, we're down. Like, kind of bumpy out there. Might not win. I was like, no, she's going to win. So I was so sure that I went to South Dakota to go hunting with my Republican colleagues. We went bird hunting. So I went out there and I went in part because I wanted to go bird hunting, but I went right before the election because I had been through this before, 2020. And I wanted them to put eyes on me. And I wanted to remind them, I'm your friend. Right? You work with me. You know me. I'm a human being. I'm an American. So are the people. And I thought they were going to lose their minds when she won. And I just wanted to reestablish the relationship so that when they lost their minds, I could call them up and say, hey guys, I know you're losing your minds. Can you not lose them as badly as you, right? And just be able to talk to them. And we had a great time. And I was at one point in a cornfield with 3 Republican AGs and me. And when I came back, somebody said to me, William, you were in a cornfield with 3 Republican attorneys general? Was there anybody else? No. And they were all armed? I said, yes, but I was armed too. When I came back from that trip, of course, the rest is history. And I was at a dinner with some of my Republican colleagues and after the election. And Chief Deputy Attorney General of a Republican state pulled me aside and she said, I know you went to South Dakota. I said, yeah. She goes, why the hell did you go to South Dakota? And I said, to hold the union together. Takes work, takes effort. We have a lot of business in Texas and Paxton. There are many people who go to Texas for work. There are students from Connecticut who go to Texas. There are people from Texas here. We are tied together. There's no soft secession. There's no retreat to our corners and not talking to each other. Because then, where did we start? We're no longer a federation. We're no longer the strongest economic engine that humanity has ever seen or known. We are still, notwithstanding what he is trying to do, the freest people humanity. And our legal system is the strongest and most stable. Much more stable than in China, right? So, but it takes work, it takes effort, it takes hope, belief, faith, confidence. And I know that Chris Kobach, Raul Labradori, and Marty Jackley, okay, who I was in the field with, are going to be in this game for a while. Chris and I, good friends, we don't agree on much. He is virulently anti-immigrant. I am the son of immigrants. But we get along good. Why is that important? Because I don't know what I'll be doing, and I don't know what 5 years. But chances are either he or I or some combination of people like us are going to be in different spaces, in different roles. And we better hope and pray that people like us talk to each other, work together. Thanks, everybody.
I knew if we really tried, we could get you to end on a high, positive note. On behalf of the library, on behalf of my firm, Kaplan family, on behalf of the entire community, thank you all for enjoyed.